Welcome to the Future of Internal Communication podcast. I'm Jen Sproul, CEO of the Institute of Internal Communication. Our organisations continue to face an onslaught of challenges, and the way we work requires dramatic transformation and response. Internal communication is a crucial function that helps organisations achieve lasting change. It's also the glue that holds organisations together in hybrid and distributed working environments. This podcast explores opportunity for internal communicators in the future of work. The world is changing, and so must we. We hope you really enjoy listening.
And welcome to a brand new episode of the Future of Internal Communication podcast. I am Kat Barnard, and I'm joined by Jen Sproul and Dominic Walters. And today we are going to have a conversation about AI and ethics. I'm delighted to welcome Dr Naeema Pasha, who has got a lot to share with us in this field. Naeema set up and led the World of Work Institute at Henley Business School, where she remains a visiting fellow, and she examines the future of work and the ethical impact of artificial intelligence on work, workers, and workplaces. So at the World of Work Institute, her film, Privacy Limited, explored the ethics of the use and effect of facial recognition technology in UK society. And I'm not sure how many of us think about that on a day-to-day basis, but that is very topical. She's also undertaken groundbreaking research on race equity in UK businesses, and research was called The Equity Effect and has been cited, if I'm not mistaken, by the Bank of England quite recently. So that's a big applause there. She now works as an independent consultant with various organisations and institutions on the topics of artificial intelligence, diversity, and also future skills, which again is something that we perhaps don't focus enough attention on. Bearing in mind the impact of artificial intelligence, what future skills will we all need? So without further ado, I am delighted to welcome you, Naeema.
Thank you so much. So good to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So I'm going to start with a big, lofty question, principally because I think it means different things to different people. But tell us what you mean when you think about ethics.
Thank you. I was thinking about this because, being invited on to speak about AI and ethics. And there are a lot of people who are AI ethicists, who call themselves AI ethicists. And I don't think I would call myself as part of that lofty group of people. The perspective I take, Kat, as you'll know, as you just talked about, is that because coming from a business school background, coming from leading teams, and coming from particularly looking at diversity and the application of technology and looking at the skills we need, what I'm really looking at is how leaders can make decisions that they feel are fair, reasonable. And the term that we're using more and more in business now is good. We look at good work. What does good work look like? What does a good organisation look like? So in that sense, I think ethics to me is about when we've got this set of, maybe we call it morality, moral principles about how we make our decisions and actions. And some of it could be about right and wrong, what's fair and unfair, and those kind of things. But sometimes it isn't as polarised as that, because the easiest decisions are when we can see a distinct kind of, well, that is clearly bad and that's clearly good. What's harder now for leaders is when it's much closer. What is good and good? And where do we go? What is bad and bad? Where do we go? Those are the difficult decisions that leaders face. And I think that's where I go. And looking at, coming in and doing talks on ethics, what I try and look at is how I'm looking at it in terms of an applied way, is that if we're looking at an organisation, you mentioned the Bank of England. It was really good to see Andrew Bailey talk about the equity effect research. And that's an example of where they were thinking, well, as a bank, traditional, I don't know, is it 300 years old? I'm going to guess something. Let's go with 300 years old-ish institution, Lloyd's of London, that kind of age of organisation. When they're thinking of who we are, what are we as an organisation? How are we addressing the kind of monetary, kind of all the things they're doing as a central bank? What does that mean? How do we have to be? So then they considered, well, actually, for us to sort of be effective and understand diversity is really critical. So we have to look at how we sort of developing, and that was race equity, that was the research I did. This was important to them in terms of their ethical stance on diversity. So that's how you bring it together, I think, is like looking at the values, looking at the direction, and really asking the question, what is the purpose of the organisation? Then it's much clearer. Otherwise, I don't know what you all think, and Jen, whether you think sometimes we can get a bit ethereal, a bit hyper philosophical. I think tech firms tend to do that about ethics. Don't know what your thoughts are.
So I just want to chime in. I think what is so interesting about that is that the requirement for modern leaders is to take a more panoramic viewpoint on the multiple trends that are transforming work and creating game-changing shifts and undercurrents, and practicing the art of making good decisions that are underpinned by some kind of moral code in the absence of uniformity. Like, no business now has the ability to drag and drop something that has been tried and tested elsewhere, because contextually they are so situationally different, with different sets of stakeholders, different value propositions. So it is, to me, it's a really interesting kind of balance, isn't it? Because I think, and again, love to hear your points on this, but I think it's probably reasonable to say that our academic focus has skewed towards the sciences in the last 15 years, whereas philosophy is very rooted in the humanities, therefore more akin perhaps to art than science. And it is this balance of working out what is the right thing to do, perhaps sometimes in the absence of hard data to guide us. You have to use your gut intuition to steer yourself, your organization, your team on what is right and what is wrong, while maintaining some kind of focus on, and I know you and I have talked about this off mic, unforeseen consequences.
Yes, I probably disagree with you a bit, but I'd love to hear what Jen and Dom think.
I think the thing for me, and sometimes I come at this in probably the more simplistic way, and I know there's lots of nuances and it can be very emotional. But when I think about it in the background that I've had, if something is legal, decent, and honest, okay, which is kind of the way of thinking, are we doing it? Now, the problem you have where I think ethics and the word legal come a little bit challenging together, and I think it leads us in the path of AI, because that's why regulation exists, and etc. So I think when your ethics comes in that point of decent and truthful, and is it within the morality of what we have set, and that has a subjective nature to it, and it does make it different. And I think that in the context of AI, where we struggle to place this potentially in that world of legal, is it what can you regulate and what can you not? And I think ethics calls up a morality in you that means you can do something outside of the law, but is it really morally right? Is it truthful and is it decent? I think would be the way I would look at it as well.
I think I'd agree with that. I think the law is one thing, and what's fair is not necessarily the same thing. So I think ethics have to be about what's fair, and you use the word good as well. But what I would say, perhaps as a communicator, I think the word ethics is incredibly unhelpful in many organizations, because it's a trigger word. If you say to someone, let's talk about ethics, most people think, oh, that's not for me. I don't work in ethics. I'm not a philosopher. So I think one of the challenges for us as communicators is, how do we talk about ethics in a way that's not being condescending? It's about making it as accessible as possible, I think. So I think that what we've just done is actually part of that process, is breaking down the concept of ethics into things that relate to people's work.
I think it's an incredibly unhelpful term, and a lot of terms that tech firms have come up with, AI ethics, hallucinations, if we go into other kind of things, when we mean like mistakes or things that have just gone a bit pear-shaped or wrong. I think they are helpful. And I think with ethics, going back to your point, Kat, about being pro-science and humanities, you get different perspectives in each. If you're humanities type of thinking has given rise to some of the things we're now fighting against in terms of EDI, equity and diversity, where people's ethics or moral stance was around, this kind of thing should happen. We still see it now. We're in the middle of an election in the UK, depending when you watch this, but where people are coming up with their particular thoughts and all kinds of things, gender recognition, there's all those kind of things where people feel themselves, I am taking an ethical and moral stance on something. And that has come through from millennia of thinking and more, particularly more recent. And you said in the last 15 years, perhaps shifted with STEM, I guess, with STEM education. I think there's more, emphasis on STEM education. But from what I can see, a lot of STEM education is still kind of trying to include this sort of broad round thinking in some of the module delivery, and certainly where I was in Henley, University of Reading and the university sector. So it feels a bit broader, but there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do, I think, in terms of how we are good. And I think what Dom's point about the way we look at this, and that's kind of why I'm a bit reluctant to say I'm an AI ethicist, because I don't see myself, but I do see myself in terms of working with organisations and leaders about working out how they make effective decisions and working out what they might feel is the right decision. You never know that until perhaps later on, unintended consequences, as we said, Kat. But looking at how you weigh those things up and look at what you do, it's against, I think, purpose, who you're here for, and how you can sort of justify some of those things. But, we're in complex times and people are making quite complex decisions about, what they're going to do around the world.
A great point to start from, isn't it? And I think that word complex is really important. You want to try and find something to simplify something so complex, but it's very hard to simplify something like this in a way. And I think that, we sit here as IoIC, and I know, Naeema, we've spoken about this a few times as well. We've been really trying to understand what AI means for us as the way we deploy it to communicate. So we enable communication through AI in the workplace, but B, how we guide our workplaces for healthy adoption of AI within the wider workforce. So I think that there is two sides of it. And what we have in the work that we've done so far in reaching out with the community and with members and IC professionals at large is that there isn't a fear of it. I don't thoroughly understand it yet. I'm intrigued, and I think it can give us lots of opportunity to create efficiencies, to do things differently, to have more time for the human work, which, communicating in every moment is a human endeavor. It could, if we see an email as non-human, then everything has a human interaction, perhaps. But I guess what they mean by that is more of that strategic work and more of that advisory work, as opposed to, that kind of monotony kind of machine that communication can become. And they say, there's opportunities and it can, do creative things and it's going to really help me. But I'm not entirely sure how it all works. I don't really understand. There are technology platforms coming at us all the time saying they've got the latest AI that's going to solve all of our challenges. And so we're sort of walking into this, I think, with not a lot of sight or understanding about its potential implications. And I think that's the major concern. I think the large concern within the membership community from a communication point of view is around security and data and what that all means. But I think there's lots more questions as we start to understand more about AI that we need to answer that are perhaps come from a more ethical stance. Like, even though we could do it this way, is it right to do it this way? Is it good to do it that way? So I guess, with that in mind, what do you think are some of those ethical risks that are associated with the adoption of generative AI, particularly, and AI at work for for communication, but also any purpose when an organization is looking to deploy it?
Yes. Well, Kat and I were discussing, I think, just at the weekend about job losses in newspapers where generative AI is being adopted more. And that's just in IoIC. I've been talking to people in the marketing organisations, big retailers, talking about their adoption of generative AI, developing their own or adopting, some of the large, like Copilot and so on out there. See, when I I'll go back a bit in order to come forward to answer this. When I set up the World of Work Institute at Henley Business School, super excited, and that was about 8 years ago, and I'd studied around artificial intelligence from a doctorate. I'd looked at it, and artificial intelligence, I think, started, or the term was coined back in 1956, I think, 1955, 56, when they had that conference when people got together in America, people from MIT and other places, to talk about this. And then things started developing, then it all went a bit quiet again. And then we had that resurgence as computer power grew. And then it went a bit quiet again. And now it's had a massive push forward with generative AI, which has had millions, I think billions probably, I'm probably more accurate talking about billions being invested into it. So you think this is exciting technology because it can come in and do so many things. But the unintended consequences of this, I think, haven't been considered, because people, the tech firms, so excited to come out with something and being something, which is the way with technology, all technology, steam engine, to now to say, well, this is great. What can we do? But what is the impact of this? And if we see impact, and I remember when I talked to MBA students, first models of generative AI before commercially, it was concerning then. I asked them to sort of start considering, what's going to be the impact here? What do you think? And everyone was like, well, this is going to be concerning on a few things. So this is on the ethics side of it. Like, I sound like I'm quite agitated, and I feel this way. I am concerned about, one major concern is bias, and that's because of my work in diversity and inclusion. But I think even if I wasn't working in diversity and inclusion, I think all of us should be concerned about this. You can do a little test of people watching this. You can just go onto an image generator using AI and write in, show me some pictures of beautiful women and handsome men. This is a Washington Post article I saw recently about this, which I thought, okay, let's try this out. And all the images are quite Western-centric features. I think there was only 9% of Black faces came into that. So we might think, well, that's because it's fed and it's learning off the internet, that's how it works. The consequences of this will be major. The consequences on people looking at this, the communities around the world, there's a global majority, will be thinking, are these the standards that we should go for? There could be developments around this technology that have guardrails around it. And that's what I talked about in the movie I did on facial recognition technology. Because again, super concerned about this. It's got poor recognition, the technology at the time of doing the film. And I think not hugely developed for recognizing Black women, for example. The technology isn't that strong enough to detect it that well. And yet being adopted by Metropolitan Police, by the New York Police and so on, is, thinking, surely this could have some negative impact. I think it's going to be used in the Olympics and in the Euros. It was used in the Champions League. And so, you have it in context where there'll be a sign up saying it's being used somewhere. But how do we all feel about this technology scanning our face? How do we feel? There's an organisation that we worked with, we did the movie called Big Brother Watch, about how people feel about their face being scanned and put against databases. When I did that movie, we worked with an organisation working in retail. It's a great movie if you get a chance to watch it. I'm super pleased with it. Called Privacy Limited. It's a nice, get the popcorn out and sit down and watch it. So, but we worked with retailers, and this comes to ethics. We work with retailers. So retailers wanting to limit shoplifting. Ethically, we don't think people should steal, obviously. So that's a strong ethical argument. This is where we get complications around ethics in AI. So we don't want people to steal. We want to prevent people from stealing products in a store. And we want to prevent harm coming to retail staff. That's a strong ethical argument. So we could say, well, okay, because that's such a strong ethical argument, let's introduce facial recognition technology into our retail stores, which it has been. And the retail store in question was using it to preempt store security, being able to stop people saying, this person, we've facially recognized them, they're on our database, and we remember it's not that accurate. Approach them, follow them around the store. So if they want to pick up a bit of cheese for their lunch and they're going to pay for it, but if we preemptively start thinking, well, they could be up to no good and we're following them out, what is the ethical stance around that from a business perspective, from a social perspective, from a civil liberties perspective as well? So that's where I think when we talk about the ethics, again, I'm not an ethicist as such, not one of those people thinks that way. I'm looking at from a particular civil responsibilities, freedom and business perspective and what leaders think, I'm happy to take a stance on that. I don't think we should be doing that. I don't think we should be tracking that. And some of the technology firms looking at facial recognition technology saying, well, we're going to put it in cars so we can see if someone's falling asleep, and that will alert. And somebody's saying, oh, right, quick, and put the alarms on, and because it's going to recognize when we start drifting off and having a sleep, so that and it will recognize that, and then it will alert the driver. But what they've also said is, from a crime prevention perspective, we could alert the police saying these people could be up to no good in their car, and we could perhaps keep them we could do something to say they could stop coming in. One of the biggest things which we talked about in the movie is that we used it it's used a lot in recruitment. I come from graduate recruitment, large volume recruitment, and facial recognition technology making assessments on what your personality is and whether you'd fit in. And number one, ethics of using that in that way. Number two, is it accurate? Can it really tell that? And number three, how do you know what personality? Is that ethically right as well? Because it goes quite strong with extrovert, team player, that kind of thing. Is that always the best thing? Or maybe you need somebody who's an introvert thinker because you need to have a reflective practice in this job. So those are just some of the things. I'm getting carried away with that one, but having going on about job displacement and other kind of things we could think about with some of the ethical challenges, I think, with AI adoption.
I just want to cut in and I will try and find it for the show notes, but there was a really interesting BBC documentary that was made several years ago about the use of facial recognition technology, specifically in interviewing. It was heartbreaking, actually, because it was just showing the extent to which the technology works for very vanilla faces, but, it doesn't work for people that are neurodiverse. And actually, the documentary exposed the use of that facial recognition technology in deciding, and it was a well-known makeup brand, I think, as I recall, in deciding who to make redundant.
Yes, that's exactly right. It was. And they went to court. And so there's a firm that says, actually, we've adapted our technology to say where we can work around neurodiverse well, and so on and so forth. But I have to say, when we did a short survey of students going through this process of facial recognition technology, video interviewing, they hated it. It was depersonalized. And this is another aspect of ethics of AI, when we think, well, this is proficient, it's productive, it's going to help us improve our output by 20% or something. The experience of people, say candidates, say if you all thought that's how we've got to get recruited these days, and we won't meet the person or the team we'll be with till much later. It's a soulless experience.
No, well, can I play devil's advocate for a moment? Because you could argue that we never respond that well to new ideas and new technology. There's always some fear about it. So you mentioned the steam engine. I think I remember from a long time ago now, when the first steam locomotive was introduced, people said, any speed over 15 miles an hour, you'll be asphyxiated and we'll all die. I can remember my parents warning me about using microwave ovens because there were stories that they would cook my innards. These are silly examples. But the point I'm getting at is, you could argue that we always look for the worst in new technologies and new ideas. And sometimes we make those fears bigger than the reality. And so I guess in some ways we need to focus on what actually are some of the most concerning risks. Not all risks are equal. So it'd be great to get from your expert position, all the studying you've done about this, when it comes to AI, generative AI, and all the things related to it, what do you think are the most concerning, the most pressing ethical risks that we should be focusing on?
Of course. Well, the first thing is I've been reading, since moving into this kind of way of thinking, I've been looking a lot more at the Luddite movement, which when we talk about Luddites kind of being anti-technology. And actually quite a lot of Luddites were a group of people who were concerned, again, about the impact on skills, the impact on jobs, the transparency, and the ethical practices of businesses coming in. So that was number one. And the other thing was fear of change and technology. I think that's, again, what the Luddites said. That's what you say about us. Actually, we're a bright group of people, and they were very highly skilled. We're not scared of technology. We've been through technological change. And I'd argue that about us, because we do get told we are fearful of change and we're fearful of technology. When, as you just said, we've been through microwaves, we've been through cars, we've been through all sorts. We're used to it, actually. And we do, as humans, we do find change concerning to begin with, but then we're also a very adaptive species. So we're actually, I think we get a little bit gaslit that we're told that we're fearful of change and we're fearful of technology, because on the whole, we're not. What we are perhaps concerned about, that past experience has taught us, is about technological leaders being ethical and strong and making decisions that are in our interest. And in the UK, we've just gone through the court cases around the post office, where we were told a computer said yes. I've just bought some clothes from online retail. I'm just giving you this example. I've got 2 of the 4 things, and they said, well, our AI systems had cameras and they could see 4 things go into the bag. You have received them. I have only 2. And I said, well, your system might be wrong. And then it's going to get complicated for me to do that. But the system is wrong. So what I'm concerned about, and what we're all concerned about, we can accept technology when we feel it's in our interest. And when Jen says we don't understand it enough, we don't know the impact and where we're going, that part hasn't been explained because we don't know that yet. So in terms of generative AI, I think, yes, it's fantastic. It can bring great things in. It can reduce time to do things. But let me give you another example of why I'm concerned. I was at a conference talking in an educational conference where somebody was talking about how generative AI in a positive way has improved teaching and learning in the organization, because it's enabled people who are teaching to do the set of slides on generative AI, because they used to have this lecturer used to have difficulties in getting things done in time. So now it goes to whatever, ChatGPT or whatever, and says, can you produce content for slides on this topic? And there they are, boom, cut and paste straight into the PowerPoint and presented. Why do we then need a teacher for that then? Why could not the student say, I need to know about molecular biology, polymer chemistry or something. I need a set of slides, make it simple, make it in the style of this, and make me that. Then you can read those notes. Why are we then having a person educating at the front who perhaps has much deeper knowledge and can bring things forward? So the argument is that will take away from teaching, because of the workload, for teachers to do the things they need to do. That is what they need to do. And also the other side of it is the trust associated with that. When they're presenting the slides, you're the student in the audience, you're thinking that's not even their content. I could get that. And in HR, another conversation with HR managers, they said, it's fantastic. We're really using generative AI to really enable our employee engagement. What we do, we look at the data that's coming from, our previous conversations. We put that through ChatGPT with previous conversations with an employee. We put that content through. We ask it to pull out the salient things. We ask it to pull out the kind of comments and prompts that we need to speak to the employee over. We ask it to do that, and then we present that back, and it helps us, sort things out. So I'm thinking, I'm the employee there. Okay, you've used that to help you condense it. But you as my manager, surely we've got a relationship that you'd be talking to me saying, listen, I'm really pleased about such and such, but we really need to work on such and such, especially if you want to go to the next grade up or whatever it is. So it comes back to when we look at something like generative AI, if it's taken, this is going back to what Jen and Kat said, if it's taking away the job that we should be doing, then where does that leave us or them or whoever? That's what my concern is.
I'm just picking up on that, so I'll pass that to Kat. Because as you're talking, I'm thinking, well, okay, those views sometimes people have because their view of what the job is limited. So if you think a teacher's job is purely imparting information, then you may think, well, absolutely, it can be done by generative AI. But if you think that a teacher's job is to help understanding, is to put in context, to make things relevant, is to help people think about stuff and their own position, and it's only part of the job. So I guess another issue you're raising there is one of the problems with generative AI is our view of jobs. And therefore, we might think it does more of the job than perhaps it does.
I think you're right in terms of what we think of our jobs. And it isn't just about that content. If you take it teaching or HR, all the other things are going on. And those are very people-orientated jobs. But what I'm talking about specifically on that is the trust. If we present that back to say, I haven't done these slides, this is produced by generative AI, or I haven't done this employee review, performance review, this was done by a generative AI, then you have a trust piece. And this is goes back to ethics. You either have to reveal that, or you have to pretend it's yours, and then you're losing some of your credibility. Applying that, yeah, of course, there's more details underneath that. We would hope that you'd come in. But if you haven't generated it entirely yourself, then in terms of applying the teaching and learning that's come through from that set of slides, you have to push a little bit further and, take things into a different way. And it's lauded in this organisation that we're talking about it. And I just thought, I don't know if I feel that's comfortable. That's where I am at the moment.
There's a kind of aura of transactionality about it all, isn't there? If this, then that, which of course is the basic premise of an algorithm, a rule. Things that bubbled up in my mind as you were describing that were, it's interesting, to make the assumption that teaching is diminished to quite literally the transfer of information from person A to person B, whereas I think we would all agree, based on our lived experience of leading workshops and development programs, I personally think every single time that I deliver, my thinking evolves because I strive to run interactive workshop sessions where the people that I am aspiring to educate feed back to me their situational context and offer up their thoughts and opinions, which moves my thinking on. And presumably that is the same, regardless of the age that you are teaching, that is the same because children and young adults and adolescents, we're all shape-shifting over time, aren't we? We're all kind of changing the way that we perceive and interact the world based on our cultural context. So the teacher's position in that regard is continuously shape-shifting and adapting to meet the needs of the audience. So that was one thing. And the other thing that just struck me as you were describing, for instance, the kind of transactionality of delivery of information from perhaps a manager to a worker. One of the things that I keep reflecting on, and I know, Jen, we've talked about this a lot, is there's a massive understatement and under recognition of emotional labour. The emotional labour that goes into building a relationship, building solidarity, building goodwill, building trust, building shared consensus and commitment. And I think for me, and I'm really cautious about this because to some degree, I sometimes think, oh my gosh, am I one of those Luddites? But I've worked in technology most of my career and seen hype bubbles come and go. And I just think, to what extent are we underplaying the intangible aspects of how we interoperate as human beings to create good outputs together? To what extent are, bluntly, the technocrats transactionalizing the intangible elements of what it means to be human and what it means to co-create together?
You have to recognize your own personal bias, right? And you have to recognize your own personal experience or personal thing when you come to any of these conversations. Because I sit here from my bias, from my experiences, and for the things that have made my career. Okay, but I try to do the math in my head then, however many decades into my career now, let's just, and I recognize that is different going in. But I would certainly say that the relationships are fundamental to my career and what we do and the human part of it. Actually, that's where most of the successes have come, or the failures have come as well, to be honest. And actually, when I have made something successful in my career and my work, yes, it's largely come from a human interaction, whether it's a creative one or a conversation or an outcome or a relationship or putting myself out there and sort of, presenting myself as a salesperson, if you like, and saying, look, you can trust me, you can buy from me. But I'm trying to go, that is my bias. So if anyone says to me how important, I'm always going to protect that, because I absolutely fundamentally believe that, and I think the IoIC, Dom, you might correct me, but IoIC, we certainly stand for human-centered communication. We fundamentally believe that is what is going to create the outcomes. But we also have to stand for the fact that technology plays a huge part of the role of enabling that. And we can't have this or that. It has to be both. And we have to, I think, find the rhythm and a dance of that relationship that really is going to work, but then doesn't devalue or diminish any human experience or human value, a person's value, a person's characteristic, a person's nature, a person's contribution. And it should be done with the mindset to enrich, not to transactionalize. But I think that understanding how we do that is really, at this point in the AI game, is really difficult, because I don't think we have those answers. And I don't think we've come at it with those questions first. We've come at it with platform or technology or product first. And product first never gets you anywhere. You're going to be forever trying to backtrack and go around that, rather than sort of let's go through those ethical questions and considerations and outputs that are going to be right for us, but that doesn't do anything to create any harm to anybody in any way. And it shouldn't ever. And work and business and humans business is only ever going to thrive without humans. I mean, Dom, am I talking IoIC rubbish? But maybe I come to you as my IoIC compatriot and my leadership person. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. No, I think none of it.
Phew, I'm not talking something wrong here.
No, I think, look, I mean, so as you were talking, then I'm thinking, as organisations, I guess, and listening to all what Naeema's been saying as well, it's about having that conversation about, look, this is the technology we've got. These are some worries that we've got. These are some shortcomings that we can see, and here's how we plan to deal with them, and getting people involved in that. And I think that's the only way around it. And I loved your reference back to the Luddites, because I think, from my limited understanding of them, they are a much maligned body of people, many of them, because they are presented as being mindless thugs, largely because I suppose the people they were opposing wrote the history subsequently, but they weren't at all. And they tried to have conversations. And I think that's underpinning what we were talking about here. So as communicators, I think we have a job to have conversations about AI, its limitations, concerns and issues, and how we resolve them.
I think you're the key people to have the conversation, because you're conversationalists, you're communicators. And now I'm really enjoying reading a lot more about the Luddites and exploring a history that I didn't know. The propaganda view of it, that they were out smashing looms and hating technology, and now I know they were questioning. And I think that's 100% exactly what you've all said, is that I think now when we look at our role, and particularly the role of communicators, it's, I think, the most important skill. So if we go back to skills and the education people, so we do have to start with the information first to structure a lecture or a workshop or something. We have to have that. And then we move into the kind of the layers underneath it, where it enable people to analyze, question, think. And that's where we are now, I think, and we're going through this. So when I started, as I say, I was like super excited, artificial intelligence, amazing. And it does a lot of clear things which are fantastic, like cancer, identifying cancer scales quickly, things around crop changes, we could be fantastic for climate, even though it does use a lot of energy, but we could balance that. But where I'm concerned are these human areas. And therefore, I'm not saying we don't ever have this, but we need to employ a lot more of our questioning, our thinking, our analysing. And it's not just about the technology, but who owns the technology? What are their directions? So when we look at this, there's the other side of it. They are businesses, they are huge businesses, and they're organisations. What are their aims and their kind of purpose as well? I think that's just where we need to consider as well, because we for other technology, we do ask those questions. Plane technology or car technology, we kind of are a bit more like that. But here we get a bit kind of over romanticized maybe about this technology.
There's such a lot of froth as well, isn't there? There's such a lot of hype. And there's, you only have to go onto any of the social media platforms at any point in time, and it's like trying to drink from a fire hydrant. The amount of people on there telling you that either they are the panacea solution to all your, confused dilemmas, or that if you don't adopt these tools pronto, you're going to get replaced by somebody who's infinitely more capable. So trying to kind of, I feel like we've been knitting clouds a little bit, but I do also feel like the more that we collectively talk about these topics, then we deepen our understanding, we move the needle on the record and so on. But bringing this back round to internal communication as a profession and a discipline and a function, Naeema, what role do you feel internal communication can play to help organisations better address the ethical issues of AI adoption at work?
As I say, I think you probably got the best part of this because, by nature, communicating needs to have critical analysis. And I think that, I'd even just pull out that particular skill and say, look, and I have done in other ways, but I think you have it, is to say, this is the most important quality that we use. And not just for internal communicators, but as internal communicators, we feel that this is how we can impart this. This is how it works. So to be critical of technology, but as we would with any kind of implementation of new things coming in, just a critical head on, I think, is really important, and that comes through already. And then we could look at it as how we move forward. Then, perhaps looking at how raising awareness of some of the issues and challenges and the benefits. So that's, again, I think something really important that I feel internal communicators can do. But the two other things I want to talk about is I think, which I see can do, and all of us, is I think we're now moving or entering into this phase where people are kind of, okay, I'm not fully sure about artificial intelligence, but I get some of it. What are the guidelines or the safety rails or some of the kind of, what do I need to know to ensure these things? And that goes back to what we were saying at the beginning. If we know the purpose and direction, how can we make this work effectively and say this is part of who we are, our heritage as an organization, or we're about learning or about this? How can we ensure that? So some of the guidelines, I think I'll call it guidelines around privacy, bias, human oversight, those are the kind of things that we say, but we maybe want more about how it's integrated in things. That was penultimate. And the last one, and the work I've been doing a lot more, is really thinking now, if we're moving into this new direction, as Don was saying, a lot of this technology is great and we can move forward. What does that look like? So some of the kind of perhaps thinking, I call it human AI symbiosis, but it's really about human AI collaboration. Let's think more about these roles where you got where AI can augment human capabilities, but also where we don't want AI at all. I would prefer it out of things like counselling and coaching, but it's there, it's everywhere, it's quite strongly there. But anyway, those sort of things, I think, well, how can we start looking? And I think the IoIC now can perhaps start turning its mind to thinking, well, what does AI human symbiosis look like, this collaboration? Where can we use it well? And where can it add value? And where can we start enabling people to think, no, ask questions here. We're not saying no, but just ask some questions. That's what I'd say.
And can I just jump in as well, Naeema? As you know, we are working with you as a follow-up to this as well. So just to say to listeners as well that we don't have a name, we don't have anything like that, but those kinds of AI guide rails or questions or something or whatever, we hope to continue to work on. And I think it is about, because there's a lot of the other thing I would say is when we're thinking about the questions that we ask as internal communicators, particularly to somebody in the IT department or to somebody in the ESG team or somebody in ops or a technology company, and I think it places that responsibility on us as procurers of this kind of technology. I think what it challenges us to is, because there's so many more things it throws up, is to have a new, more varied questions. And I think where we, as IoIC, we hope to guide you is what are those questions to ask, because actually they're things we've never had been faced before, so you wouldn't think to ask, because it's not a natural thing about, do you scan faces and what do you do with that data? Or, we have to find, I think, a new language to ask the right kind of questions to make sure we enact within those guide rails. And I think as IoIC, hopefully that's something over the coming months, and with your expertise, we'll bring in and we'll consult with members on that so that we can have that collective place to come from. Because I think the challenge at the moment is, other than knowing we should ask where is data going, we don't really understand the full language we should be using of those questions to make sure we're investigating properly before we go into a decision. And I think that's the challenge that we're in as a profession as well.
The challenge that everyone faces, and we talked about some examples from job areas such as HR, teaching and learning, and other kind of things. These are the kind of questions I think we're all in at the moment.
To bring us into land, we talked about lots of fantastic things which have sparked up lots of thoughts. And you gave us those three challenges, I think, around critical analysis, around establishing and building guidelines, and about human AI collaboration symbiosis. So I know it's a difficult question, but to finish off, what's one thing that you would like internal communicators listening to this to take from our conversation?
I think I'm going to pick up what Jen said. I think once we're off with, you know what, let's start having these open conversations about AI. Let's call it ethics because we're talking ethics here, but some of the things around AI ethics. So we think, what does ethical AI look to you? What would the impact that you have? And I think once we start those conversations and people feel more comfortable, because there's a lot of people think with AI, myself included, thinking, oh my gosh, even now I was thinking, oh my gosh, there are real experts out here who know a lot more detail. And I think, well, actually it doesn't matter. I don't know how an internal combustion engine works, but I can still have a view on Boeing at the moment. It doesn't. I feel you are communicators. IoIC is the profession. So developing proactive communications by initiating these some of more open conversations about AI ethics, about the impact, and look at some of those complexities, and therefore look at how we start building those questions, Jen, around trust, risk, and perhaps we're talking about, responsible adoption and things like that. What that might look like for the near future, and what might be, as Kat said, the thing we're really working on a lot is the impact of that, and therefore perhaps some of the unintended consequences that we may consider around those things. That's what I'd say, Dom.
Naeema, thank you so much, Kat. I'll try to throw back to you as to close. But I just want to say thank you, and I think just to say as listeners as well, we are going to do more and hopefully work with you on this because it's a whole new learning curve for us all, and we want to support people through it.
Absolutely. And, the more that we surface the questions that we've got, all of us, because we'll all have different questions based on our own particular worldview, our own particular lived experience. So there is no such thing. I think I've said this a couple of times in recent pieces for the IoIC. There's no such thing as a silly question anymore. Actually, to quote, I think, a Harvard academic who wrote a book, can't remember his name, but the book was called Questions Are the Answer. And I think that's where I would park this. But yes, I'm looking forward to us collaborating and doing more kind of investigative analysis and more kind of surfacing of what are the things that actually matter. If we are going to fully leverage these digital efficiencies, then surely the byproduct of that must be more humanized workplaces. So let's keep that at the center of our line of inquiry. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your viewpoints with us today. I'm sure we will have you onto the podcast before too long because, but at the pace at which things are unfolding, there will be plenty more opportunity to dissect and contemplate.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast episode. If you have, please like it and share it on your preferred digital channels. Help us spread the word to build a better, more connected and inclusive future of work.